Luna looked over at Zephyr, who was currently weighing a small bag of coins he'd lifted off some drunken idiot who'd nearly knocked over their table. No, absolutely not. We're not taking him. He gives me the creeps. Freya, who was just finishing healing the ill-mannered drunkards Luna had set on fire, shook her head. Well, we need a frontliner of some kind after you seared our last one, and he's the only fighter who's not already committed to another group. Either we take him, or you try to reprise your role as a battle mage. Remembering how that particular adventure had ended, before they got even a mile out of town, Luna frowned. Well, I still don't like it. There's something off about that guy. There must be a reason he's always adventuring on his own. Zephyr was counting his newly acquired coins when he added his own 2 cents to the conversation. I'll tell you one thing. That guy is a mark, born and raised. That's the kind of smile I only ever see on slow-witted farmers, before I take them for all they have in a shell game. Freya smiled patiently, pretending to not have heard the last part her rogue friend said. Listen, I hear what you're saying, but I'm no battle cleric, and based on how much I have to heal you, you're both as squishy as a wet paper sack. So unless we just want to retire here and now, we need someone who can take a hit, and he's the only person who knows how to wield a proper sword available. With the other 2 relenting, the priest took it upon herself to signal the warrior over. Luna couldn't help it, though. The way the living mountain of muscle pointed at himself to confirm Freya meant him, then grinned like an idiot, only made her more uncertain. The giant man looked more like a farmhand than a seasoned warrior, but his record spoke for itself. Even though he always fought on his own, he was rated a full grade higher than their small party by the guild, so he must know what he was doing. But as he weaved through the crowd, rather than walk with a purpose, he juked and dodged around everyone else, apologising like a weakling the whole time. Oh, sorry about that. Oh, better watch yourself there, bud. That was a close one. Sorry. If I could just squeeze through a smidge, that'd be great. Pardon, excuse me. Coming through. Sorry. By the time he'd made it to their table, Luna was ready to sink into a crack in the floor rather than be seen with a bumpkin like him, and Zephyr looked like he was prepared to make some gold off the man. Only Freya kept her expression neutral, as the warrior plopped himself down in the chair and spoke. Well, howdy. I saw you all seemed mite interested in my company. What can I do you for? Freya nodded in acknowledgement and started explaining their situation. Pardon us, fair warrior. We were just wondering... Before she could get her full explanation out, the warrior interrupted her. Oh, you don't have to call me that. Just call me by my given name, Stan. Luna all but choked on her drink. Stan? That wasn't a proper name for an adventurer. It was just so boring. Though, looking at the man in question, it did seem to fit. Freya continued. Yes, Stan. We were just wondering if you'd like to join our little group on an adventure... Once again, Stan cut her off. Join your group on an adventure? Boy, howdy, I'd love to. This'll be my first real adventure. I'm looking forward to it. That made everyone stop for a moment. It was Zephyr who broke the silence. Your first adventure? But I thought you were B-ranked. How'd you get that high without going on adventures? Stan just grinned like an idiot. Oh, I just did a few chores the guild needed doing. Cleaned out a few bandit hideouts, chased away an orc raiding party or 2. Oh, and there was the Chimera. But everyone knows it's not an adventure when you go out on your own. Adventures are when you fight beside heroes and topple demon lords. You know, adventures. Luna blinked rapidly. You fought a Chimera? Stan just shrugged. Well, I don't know as I'd call it a fight, more of a disagreement really. I just shoot him off so he wouldn't keep bothering the small village down the way is all. Luna couldn't believe her ears. This man had faced down a Chimera all on his own? That was usually a job for a whole B-level party. But somehow she just couldn't bring herself to doubt this man's word. he was just so earnest. Freya was the first to recover. Yes, well, we're not thinking anything so ambitious as a Demon King. It's really just more of what you've been doing. Clearing out another bandit hideout is all, so if you're not interested. Stan held up his oversized hands. Whoa now, I never said we needed to start out there. We can start small. That's how we'll get to know each other. Another bandit hideout is fine by me. We can skedaddle whenever you're all ready. Luna was having doubts when another fight broke out between some more drunk adventurers. However, what should have been a standard tavern brawl took a turn when one of the men drew steel. Luna readied a fireball, and Zephyr prepared his purse-cutting knife, but Stan beat them to the punch. Before Luna realized what happened, he was standing between the two combatants with hands raised. Whoa now, fellas. Now, this ain't necessary. Why don't we all just calm down and I'll buy you another round while we talk it out. Just then, one of the combatants smashed a chair over Stan's head from behind. But rather than fall over or get angry, Stan just rubbed his head as he admonished his attacker. Now that wasn't very nice. It took some poor craftsman several hours of his life to make that fine chair, and you went and ruined it just like that. Now, before you break any more valuable things in here, why don't you just take a deep breath and apologize? The attacker, realizing that anyone who could take a blow like that without seeming any the worse for wear might not be someone you want to get on the bad side of, muttered a half-hearted apology and retreated. As the warrior continued to talk things out, Zephyr turned to Luna. Well, at least we know he can take a hit. As they walked down the path toward their goal, the small party was surprised when several bandits armed with crossbows jumped out of some bushes and shouted, This is a robbery! Just drop your gear and no one has to get hurt! Zephyr grinned at Luna as he pulled his knife. These idiots have no idea what they're in for. Luna couldn't help but agree. They might be a C-ranked group, but a couple of small-time bandits were nothing they couldn't easily handle. She readied another one of her fireballs, but the bandits were surprisingly fast, firing off a few bolts before she could lose her spell. Suddenly, Stan was in front of her, and while she couldn't quite see around the oversized man to see what happened, the two metallic clangs told her he'd somehow deflected both bolts with his massive two-handed sword. But just as things were about to get good, Stan addressed their would-be robbers. Well, hold on there, fellas. I can't help but notice you're just a bit unprepared for your chosen targets. Why don't we all just calm down and talk this out like civilized people? One of the bandits sneered up at the massive man as he spoke. Easy for you to say. It's hard to be civilized when you've gone hungry for the last week. Stan just nodded. Well, there we're in agreement. I'll tell you what, I happen to pack a mite more food than I need. Why don't I share some of it with you and we can talk about this? What say? Looking back, Luna wasn't quite sure how it happened, but eventually they were all sitting together, sharing a lunch while the bandits poured out their woes to Stan. And after the drought, people just sort of took up robbing to get by, and that's what brought us here. Stan nodded commiseratingly. Well, that's a sad story if ever I've heard one. Y'all aren't really bandits. You're just some poor folk down on your luck. I'll tell you what, my folks own a farm just down the road. Smith Acres, it's called. You go there, tell my folks old Stan sent you, and they'll give you food and a place to stay for a night. And they're always looking for help. They could probably give you some good paying jobs if you like. Help you get back to the straight and narrow. It wasn't long after that the bandits had handed over their weapons and gave Stan a big old hug before setting off down the road. But all Luna could think of was, of course, his name is Stan Smith. What else could it be? As they were settling in for the night, Luna couldn't help but be bothered by something, though it took her a minute to figure out what. Finally, it occurred to her. Hey, Stan? It felt odd, just saying such a boring name. I was wondering, just why did you decide to become an adventurer? Stan looked surprised. Well now, I just figured it would be a good living, is all. Luna shook her head. Well, yes, we all want to get paid, but what drove you to it? Take Zephyr here. He started by taking down the man who murdered his parents growing up. Zephyr smiled cruelly. Caught him and made him pay too. Took him for everything he was worth, even his life. Stan just looked aghast. Well now, that sounds horrible. I'm sorry you had to go through something like that, Zeph. That must have been rough. He was then contemplative for a moment before asking, So wait, is that kind of thing normal for an adventurer? Luna nodded. Well, yes. My village was burned down by some roaming orcs, and Freya was excommunicated when she caught a fellow priest abusing his flock and taking things into her own hands. Freya nodded. I paid the price for taking the god's justice into my own hands, but I regret not my decision to do so. Having proven her point, Luna turned to Stan. So what about you? What happened to you? Apparently your parents are alive and well, but what about the rest of your family? Brother or sister killed? Or maybe your true love was taken by bandits? Or maybe you were cursed or given a divine mandate? Stan shook his head. Nope, none of that. All 8 of my brothers and sisters are fine, running the farm back home. I never really fell in love. And as far as curses or mandates go, while I say my morning and evening prayers, I've never been particularly spiritual. I doubt any god or devil is much interested in little old me. Luna shook her head in frustration. So, what is it then? What drove you to become an adventurer? The giant man just shrugged again. Well, I suppose it looked like a pretty nifty way to live. Don't get me wrong, managing the farm is fulfilling and all, and it gave me the muscles needed to build this thing. He patted the vastly oversized hunk of metal he called a sword. But I suppose I figured the grass looked greener over here. Besides, I'm the runt of the litter. I figured I'd leave the hard work to my brothers and sisters who got some real muscle on them, and try out something more fitting to my ability. Luna chose not to try and comprehend what the rest of the Living Mountains family must look like, if he was the runt, and pressed on. So, wait. You're really just some regular, healthy, well-adjusted, oversized guy who decided to go adventuring for fun? Stan nodded. Yup, I suppose that about sums it up. Luna decided she didn't have any more questions. She wasn't sure she could handle the answers. When they got to the Bandit Hideout, Luna's hopes for an exciting battle rose when Stan kicked the doors down. Not some little average house doors, no. These were 10 feet tall and 6 inches deep of solid oak wood, and Stan kicked them down as easily as tipping over a cow. But, of course, that's where the excitement ended. There were over a dozen bandits on the other side, all frozen, staring at the mountain of a man who walked over the remnants of their front gate. Luna was readying another fireball when Stan spoke. Pardon, but I don't suppose you lot could direct me to your boss. One of the bandits pointed a shaky hand towards the hut in the back. Stan nodded and smiled. Right, thanks, Dan. Now, you'll know the drill. Your fun and games are over. Did you at least do what I said last time? The bandit, apparently named Dan, nodded. Yes, sir. No women or children, no one died, and we didn't rob no one that couldn't afford it. Stan nodded. Alright, so long as that's true, you lot can get out of here, and I'll just haul the boss in this time. But remember, you make too much trouble and I'll bring you all in next time. I don't suppose there's any takers for getting an honest job with my folks, is there? A few of the bandits raised their hands and Stan nodded. Alright, you know the drill. Head to the ranch, tell them I sent you, and they'll set you up with a job. With that, the bandits all cleared out, with a handful headed back the way the adventurers had come from. Luna couldn't believe herself. What? You're just going to let them get away? Stan shrugged. Most of the fellas are all right. Occasionally some big shot moves out here from the cities, thinking they can take over this little podduck area. Of course, they recruit local muscle, and the fellas all know my rules, so they keep the big fish from making too much trouble. About the time they get around to making a proper hideout, the guild sends me to clean things up. I had to knock some sense into them the first couple of times, but by now, we've got an understanding." Luna was about to argue further, when suddenly the door to the shed in the back of the hideout burst open, and out ran the second biggest man Luna had ever seen, charging right for Stan, wielding a giant battle axe and wearing a set of armour that looked as effective as it was intimidating, which is to say, very. The axe swung in a blinding arch, only for Stan to deflect it at the last moment. The two then exchanged a flurry of blows, leaving the other three adventurers gaping as they tried to process what they were witnessing. Every blow Stan landed bounced off the armour ineffectually, and soon the bandit leader had Stan on the defensive. Luna wondered what they could do. A fireball would hit Stan as well, and without armour he'd be at a disadvantage. If the bandit leader didn't die, that monster would make short work of the rest of them. That was when Luna got an idea. Digging through her spellbook, she passed by all the fire-based spells she usually used, going back to some of her earliest magics, and there it was. With a few almost forgotten hand motions, she shouted the spell's name. "Conjure water!" Sure enough, the ground around the two combatants turned into a soppy mess, and suddenly, that massive suit of armour the bandit leader wore went from a help to a hindrance as he struggled to move his feet through the mud. On the other hand, being born and raised on a farm meant Stan was well versed in working in a mess, and he suddenly had the advantage, letting him swiftly take the bandit leader's head. Or at least, he would have if he'd been a typical warrior, but this was Stan. Instead, he reversed his grip on his sword and slammed the solid metal pummel against the bandit leader's head. The resulting clang was enough that Luna felt a sympathy headache as the bandit fell into the mud, virtually helpless as Stan kicked the axe away. Again, any typical party would have finished the bandit leader off and taken his head as proof of their accomplishment, but Stan had other ideas. Once the bandit leader was properly tied up, Stan launched into a lecture about how his actions could hurt a lot of decent people, and if he just used his strength for something good, like adventuring or farming, he could be a real asset to the community. This lecture lasted the entire journey back, 2 straight days of non-ending lecture. It went on long enough. Luna thought she would lose it, but the bandit leader was sobbing by the time they reached the guild. "Please, just toss me in a cell and throw away the key. I can't take this anymore." The clerk behind the counter motioned for some guild guards to take the bandit away, as she winked at Stan. "Broke another one, eh, Stan?" For his part, Stan just shook his head sadly. Some folks just won't listen to reason. The clerk nodded. "So true. Shall I send the reward to your family, like usual?" Stan shook his head. "Nope, just a quarter of it this time. The rest goes to my friends. I'm in a party now." Luna was surprised. Honestly, she hadn't done much of anything. None of them had, aside from Stan. She would have likely agreed if he demanded an 80% cut, but it seems Stan felt otherwise. As usual, Freya sent her share to the local orphanage, and Zephyr sent his to the local brothel, in person. Luna spent the night in the guild hall, ordering all the food and drink she could afford, which, thanks to Stan, was a healthy amount. She was awakened by an annoyingly cheerful farmhand shaking her shoulder and smiling. "Wakey, wakey! The sun's up, and it's time to go adventuring." Luna squinted against the glare of the morning light. Go away, unless you want to be cooked to a crisp." Stan's face finally came into focus. "Rough night, eh? My brothers drank me onto the table a time or 3, but just like my mama always says, you can dance with the devils, but you still gotta walk with the sun touched. Besides, it's time to go on another adventure." That was when Luna noticed a rather irritated-looking Zephyr and a satisfied-looking Freya behind him. She hadn't really considered whether to keep adventuring with Stan, but then again, they'd gotten a good payday, and Stan seemed to be able to pull more than his weight, which was honestly saying something at his size. Finally, she relented. Oh, all right. What is it this time? Another bandit hideout, or maybe an orc camp? Stan slapped her request poster down on the table, but Luna's eyes were taking a moment to focus as he spoke. Well, I was thinking something a bit bigger this time. That was when the picture in the poster finally came into view. It was a dragon. A Class A monster. That woke Luna the rest of the way up, and she raised her hand to get the attention of one of the servers. Another beer, please.